Thank you. Teresa, did you want to go?
Hi, everyone. Can you still see me okay? Because I can't see anybody, which is
Yes, we can.
very unusual. You can see my screen?
Yes.
Great. My name is Teresa Crowe. I'm a professor of social work at Gallaudet University. I thought I'd give you a little background about Gallaudet so you know the context in which I teach. Gallaudet is located in Washington, D.C. It is a university that was chartered by Abraham Lincoln in the 1850s to provide higher education for deaf and hard of hearing adults. It's the only one of its kind in the world. All of our undergraduates are deaf or hard of hearing, and the graduate students are deaf, hard of hearing, and hearing. We teach all of our classes in sign language. We use American Sign Language. Right now, I think we probably have a student body of about 1,200, 1,300 students. The social work program has an undergraduate and a graduate program. About between 130 and 150 students come through. So I don't know if you're familiar, but the community at Gallaudet is considered a culturally deaf community as opposed to a disabled group. And the differences are that not all people who have hearing loss consider themselves culturally deaf. The people that I work with and the research that I do are with people who use American Sign Language as their primary method of communication. The focus is definitely on empowerment, socialization, visual space, and less emphasis on auxiliary aids like hearing aids or cochlear implants or learning to speak. It's a different subset of the larger population. So all of my research is with the deaf community, this particular part of the deaf community. And this particular study that I'm going to talk about is about negative life experiences, substance use, well-being, and resilience. This was a survey of deaf and hearing people. And so I do a lot of research with mental health related themes, help seeking, well-being, resilience, substance use, life experiences, intimate partner violence, domestic violence, psychiatric groups. And it's always very, the research in comparison to groups of hearing people on the same topics is very, very much smaller. So keep that in mind as we kind of go through. In general, the literature, before I start there, I want to let you know that the poster and the full manuscript are going to be, they're downloaded to the website. So you should have access to them and they'll be published in the proceedings. So this is more of an overall summary of the study. In general, the literature shows that deaf people are more likely to have experienced trauma and negative life events. And that includes deaf children, a higher incidence of abuse, physical, sexual abuse, neglect, higher rates of intimate partner violence. There are higher rates of mental health issues, but psychiatric issues, the prevalence is similar to hearing populations. Some of the issues that deaf people face involve language deprivation, which means that when a baby is born deaf, and if the parents are hearing and they're not familiar with, how to deal with a deaf child, it usually takes them some time to kind of get the resources, learn about different methods of communication, different types of education, different types of technology that can be used. And if parents delay in getting themselves up to speed about what their deaf child is going to need, then there can be a lapse of substantive communication. So we call it language deprivation because the longer that the child goes without communication or language or ability to negotiate the world, the higher risk that there are negative outcomes later in life. That includes mental health outcomes and resilience and coping strategies and things like that. Also, deaf people as a group experience a lot of social discrimination, prejudice, oppression, and marginalization. A lot of it has to do with accessibility, despite the federal laws where communication needs to be provided. If you have a deaf client, there are still a lot of areas where deaf people have difficulty accessing housing. I mean, think about any kind of life domain, housing, employment, mental health services, healthcare services, just runs the gamut. So it's an issue as a group that they deal with. This particular study included 206 people, 69 were deaf, 137 were hearing, which is a little unusual. Most of my studies have a larger percentage of deaf participants, but this was done, the data was collected last year. So it was, we were still in a pandemic, and for the most part, Gallaudet's classes and things were online. But the results of the survey were that the deaf people, the deaf sample, were reported higher marijuana use, but lower use of other substances, including stimulants, prescription drugs, and inhalants. They were more likely to have been sent to prison or jail. They were more likely to have a serious physical illness, more likely to be sexually abused by a partner, more likely to have an abortion or miscarriage, more likely to live with parents who are separated or divorced. And they also tended to have higher levels of well-being and resilience, which seems kind of counterintuitive, but many studies, including many of my own, showed that the levels of resilience and well-being among deaf samples typically is higher than those of hearing samples. Both groups, which is also supported by the literature, had the more problems they had with mental health, more negative life experiences. It was associated with lower levels of resilience and well-being, more frequent symptomatology of mental illness, and the less resilience and well-being. These are all supported by the literature. So the study supported other studies of deaf adults and having more negative life experiences than hearing people, probably for some of the reasons that I mentioned. There, abuse in many forms is pretty complicated when you, in and of itself, but when you add deaf and hard of hearing people that have additional issues with partners, whether their partner is hearing or deaf, and communication and all kinds of things like that. They reported less substance use, higher marijuana use, but lower substance use. This has also been found in many studies. I'm not exactly sure why that is. As I said, a lot of studies are, there are not as many studies of deaf samples, and there are a lot of different sub-communities within the deaf community that probably need some more work. And also the impact of mental illness on resilience and well-being. So the more symptoms you have of being mentally ill, the more difficult you have in recovering from that and in maintaining your well-being. The two findings that were surprising that I found no research about were the impact of abortion and miscarriages. I haven't found any studies about the deaf community about that. So that needs further exploration. Also, the sample needed to include not only more demographic diversity, but also more research in the subgroups. And when I mean subgroups, I mean the individuals who are deaf and blind, individuals who are part of the LGBTQ community, individuals who are Pacific Islanders, African Americans or Black, Latinos. There are a lot of different vibrant sub-communities within the deaf community. And there I am, and there's my contact information if you have any questions. And if anybody has any questions, I'm happy to take them.